know that we have a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of indigenization and decolonization with the curriculum. I know for me personally, I have a lot ahead of me as well, but part of where I'm at right now is in kind of the learning and the unlearning phase of that journey. And, I'm really hopeful that if I continue to work at this, that this is something that I can hopefully contribute meaningfully to conversations in the future, and also be part of some calls to action, right? So that we can truly, achieve some of our truth and reconciliation goals. And I encourage you all to do, something similar in whatever way is meaningful for you. I think I gotta click here. Okay, getting used to all the tools. So one of the things I want to start with is I really want to start by thanking you for being here. The reality is this is an extremely busy time of year. You all could have been so many other places, preparing for your fall semester, but you're here, and that means so very much to me, especially, and also just to the work that we're doing, my team is doing. And so when I was preparing for this, I couldn't help but think about September 2015, which is when I joined Western as a faculty member. One of the first things that my colleagues in physiology and pharmacology did is they brought me to fall perspectives. And I had been a sessional lecturer at so many different places. And that first day when I came to that conference, and I remember Dr. Mike was given the keynote at that time, and I remember the room, I remember what he said, I remember the people and the conversations, and I was so inspired by all of you and your commitment to education and, just your commitment to community. And ever since that day, I have honestly felt so welcome. And I honestly have all of you to thank for a lot of, what I've been able to do, because I really do believe that it is a collective effort. Oh, we're maybe gonna have to do this. I'll try to keep hiding, but it might not work. All right, so in terms of, being here, I'm excited that you're here. And again, here means a bunch of different things. We're very fortunate that technology has allowed us the flexibility to be present in different ways. This is not clicking. Okay, so we've got 3 ways that people are here today. We've got those of you who are joining in person, we've got those who are on Zoom, and then some people might even be tuning in, watching the recording afterwards. And so I really do want to encourage participation. I want to hear your thoughts today. I think a lot of what I'm going to be talking about, and if we do work towards inclusive educational practices, we need to make sure voices are heard and different voices. And the other thing I really want to acknowledge is I don't see myself as an expert in this content. I see myself as someone who had a passion for the topic. I gained some experience, and then those things collectively have allowed me to speak about what I'm going to speak about today. So to encourage kind of some participation and let you know where I might be wanting to hear from you, I've got this little banner that you're going to see on some of my slides today. But honestly, at any point, please feel free to shout out, raise your hand, whether it be in person or your virtual hand. I've also got the chat open here, and I'm going to do my best to navigate all those things so that I can keep an eye on what's going on. Okay, so here we are, right? August 31st, 2022. Honestly, I've been thinking about this, and I'm not sure if I'm most shocked that the month is August, that the summer is over, or if the year is 2022. The past 2 years have been a whirlwind for all of us. And, before we start chatting about some of the things we're going to chat about today, it's really important to me that we ask, this really important question, which is, how are you feeling, right? How are you feeling today? How are you feeling going into the semester? Because if we're going to start challenging our thinking, challenging our assumptions, our biases, I think we have to be real with ourselves, real with each other, and be a little bit vulnerable to engage in those conversations. So maybe a better way of asking, are people feeling excited? Are you feeling nervous? And again, feel free, shout out in the chat, whatever makes sense. And I'm going to take a minute in a second to share how I'm feeling. Karis. Not ready. That is an amazing sentiment that I think a lot of people are feeling right now. And it helps to say it out loud, right? It normalizes it. It makes us feel less bad about that. Any other feelings? Nervous excitement. I love that, right? So this is actually a question I ask a lot of my students on a weekly basis. And I specifically phrase it by saying, What are you nervous about? What are you excited about? And then we often try to think about how those two feelings overlap a little bit and how, we can actually have similar physiological responses to them. So very, very powerful question, simple, but complicated, right? At the back. Amazing. Grateful is another awesome feeling, and welcome. That's amazing. And I hope that, everything goes smoothly in terms of all of that. Any other kind of feelings? And I'm keeping an eye on the chat too. Brian's feeling busy. Yeah, Brian, I think that's a legitimate feeling as well. So for me, if I think back about August in general of any semester, typically I'm feeling that nervous excitement that was shared with all of us, right? And I would say usually the excitement outweighs the nervousness by just a little bit. And honestly, even in the past 2 years with all the uncertainty, I still felt kind of that energy and that excitement to go into a new term. But if I'm being honest with myself and with all of you today, I'm feeling more nervous than anything else. And I've tried to unpack that a little bit. And what I think I've arrived at is that I don't know what to expect. And I don't mean about the delivery mode or what we're going to cover in our courses. I don't know what to expect from students. And I don't know what they expect from me going forward, right? And so that is how I'm feeling. And then on top of all of that, I feel this immense pressure and this responsibility to make whatever I do great for them, right? If I'm going to ask you to come back to this campus and I'm going to put you in a room like this, then I feel this pressure to make sure it's worth your while, right? And so, when I think a little bit about that and, I'm reflecting on, and I think Dr. Kim Solga's here today too, we did a session in the spring and a lot of these feelings came up as well. And so it was nice to hear that other people are feeling that too. And I think we have to remind ourselves that it's not our responsibility to take on all that pressure. We can do, only what we can do, and we have to kind of be ready to make those changes. So I just wanted to start off by sharing a little bit about that. And, again, it's nice to hear that other people are, sharing similar sentiments for sure. Okay, so I think it's always helpful when we have a little bit of a, session agenda and we know what's going on. So the title of my talk, where do we go from here? And then uncovering the hidden curriculum. And those are the two parts that I'm going to focus on today. I'm going to spend a decent amount of time on number one, right? Because I can't really share with you some of the work my team's been doing without you understanding where it comes from and why we've been focused on it. So I'm going to discuss past and as well as the future of education, or where, we think things might be going or where we should focus our efforts. But I very much want to hear from you. And so again, any way you can participate, but I've got lots of examples to share too in case we're a little bit shy today. And then I'll shift over to this second half, right? Uncovering the hidden curriculum. I'll share my journey with this work and why it is I do what I do, and then highlight a fairly large and recent collaborative project that I had the pleasure of leading a team to work on. One of the things I was showing my partner my talk, and he's like, you've got a lot of roads on your slides, right? And so for me, especially that first part of where do we go from here, I kind of have this analogy of the road in my head. And so I encourage you all to picture, what does the road look like for you? So when I was first starting my talk, I had the fork in the road, and then I thought, well, no, I don't even know what my options are, right? So that doesn't really accurately represent things. And so I ended up kind of going with more of that curvy, not sure what the destination is at the end, looking ahead, not sure where I'm going to end up. That's the road that I'm, about to go down. For you, it might be really windy, really bumpy, right? Maybe there's some bad weather ahead, who knows, right? But just really try to think of that analogy, because it helped me kind of really think more about that point right there. Okay, so here again is where I would love to hear from you. So if we're going to look ahead and we're going to talk about where can we go, we have to take a look back, and specifically the past 2 and a bit years. So I am curious to hear from people. What did you notice? What stood out to you? What changed over the past 2 years? And again, shout out, raise your hand. We've also got a microphone if some people have some maybe lengthier answers, and in the chat too. Yeah, and thank you, Joe, for reiterating. Dr. Woods.
Everything go online. was exhausting. And then the 2021 summer, it was like emotion and anger and frustration about things that you can't control and we couldn't control. That's how I was just feeling all kinds of feelings, and I'm normally a feelings person. This summer, I said, heck to the no. I'm taking a break because I can't keep doing this. So I took 3 weeks off, best 3 weeks of my life, but really hard to get back on the work thing. So, I mean, obviously it happened and it's going to happen no matter what, but it's just been strange how each summer has been so intense for different reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's important that we talk about this from both faculty, staff side, and also the students as well. So thank you so much for sharing that aspect. What else? What else have people noticed? What's changed? What's been different? Dr. Solga?
Thanks. I had similar feelings about 2020 and 2021, and I did not do the good thing for myself and take the proper amount of time off for 2022. So I'm envious of you right now. I feel on that note, like we learned a lot in the early days of the pandemic, alongside all the pain and the stress, about the need for change and the need for shifting out of our normal, and even perhaps the need for questioning neoliberal models of labor and consumption. And I now feel as though that may be slipping away from us. There's I feel a lot of pressure to go back to normal, even though I feel nothing like normal. And I feel like we are not having the kind of conversation about the trauma that we've all been through that maybe needs to happen. And I'm really worried about the kettle boiling on us and what that might lead to for all of us, students, staff, and faculty.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, both of you, for adding those sentiments, which are obviously similar, but also covering different aspects. And everyone I talk to, that's a very much shared sentiment. And I think that when we talk about our students or us, there's probably a lot of similarities that are happening there too. So when I mentioned about not being sure what to expect, I think that's a lot of at the source of what's happening in the classroom. For me, what I noticed is we were all of a sudden starting to talk more about accessibility. People were starting to have conversations more about, any sort of equitable practices. That's what we're here to talk about today. There was this need for flexibility, and our students wanted it, but we wanted it too, right? And then support, right? I think overall, people needed and wanted to be supported throughout everything. And at the end of the day, I think we learned the value of, human connection and just how powerful that is. And so obviously it is wonderful to be in a room like this today again and be able to chat with people and talk with people. But again, keeping in mind some of those, reflections that have been shared. For me, the one thing that I keep coming back to when I think about the past 2 years, the pandemic did not create any of these issues or barriers that we're talking about today, right? Instead, and there's different ways you could phrase this, it revealed them, it magnified them, it made more people see and care about them sooner, right? You've probably heard the analogy of, we're all in the same storm, but our boats are different, right? And so I think that, going through something like a global pandemic together brought us together in some ways and made us think about things that we hadn't thought about previously. But honestly, these things have existed for so long, right? Decades, probably longer, right? And so anyone who's been doing this kind of work was starting to see these things emerging, well before the pandemic. The good news right now is that now more people are interested in having this conversation. And I'll keep my eye on the chat. Looks like we've also got some awesome comments as well. So I'm probably not going to try to summarize too much because that might be distracting, but maybe we can do a quick little, gathering the thoughts at the end and share them with people. Oh, it just doesn't want to stay where I want it to stay. Okay, so then there's this reflection of looking back. What about, before COVID, before March 2020, right? So for me, one of the things that had been on my mind really recently, and part of the reason I started doing the work I did, is this mental health in academic institutions, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about this because this is an important piece of what the conversation is all about as well. And if we look to see what was going on, there's a few things that we know. So number one, we know that students need right, mental health support, right? That's been known for a really long time. And so in response to that need, campuses increase their mental health and well-being support and services. The problem is, though, demand for care continues to rise. So if you look at the statistics year after year, the demand significantly increases. And I really want you to think about this last point here, because this one kind of, keeps me thinking about what I can do better. Those in need might not seek available support or services. So this is the first time I want you to maybe challenge your thinking if you haven't already done so in the past. So I hear things like people will say, well, anyone can go book an appointment. These services are available to all students, but the reality is it's not that simple, right? And so there's different things that could be going on in a student's life, could be their cultural background. There's so many reasons, maybe the stigma of mental health as well, that can be seen, depending on who you talk to. That statement is worrisome, right? And we really need to think about what we can do about that, because otherwise we're not going to be able to get anywhere. So we know our campuses are having these crises, and this is true across all campuses in, probably North America, probably even the world, right? And so there's this relationship that exists between mental health and academic performance. And what the literature tells us is this is a bi-directional relationship. So a student's mental health can impact their academic performance and vice versa. Now, I do want to be clear to say that mental health, I think people think of it as the negative aspect, but I want you to, open up your mind to think positive and negative, right? So when we talk about mental health, we can also be talking about a positive mental health for a student. So if you turn to some of the literature, you'll see statements like mental health can impact and predict academic success, right? So we're talking about this relationship here, mental health having on academic performance. But what's also true, and what we're seeing a lot more in the literature now, is the reverse, right? Where learners are reporting poor mental health that's associated with academic stress and anxiety from educational environments. So very simply put, what we do in our classes can also be contributing, or what we don't do, that could also be part of this, can be contributing to a student's mental health, right? Again, positive or negative. And so really important that we understand that relationship. I'm not going to go through too much of this data, but I really want to bring it to your attention because I think it's an important data set that, it was something I learned about when I was doing the eCampus project, and there's so much information in it. So it's the National College Health Assessment, and they have different, I think they have data every semester, but they typically post the Canadian reference data once a year, okay? So this is the spring 2022 data, and again, the way that the data are aggregated, it's very complex. And so I didn't want to just overwhelm you with data today. But what I want you to be aware of is that going to sites like this and just even reading and seeing what's going on for our current students, especially things that might be impeding their academic performance, is eye-opening. So if you look at the data over the years, you'll see there's more and more factors that are being added to this survey. So there are different iterations of it. And if you look at the percentage of students who are experiencing various things on there, they are also increasing year after year. So I highly recommend people going ahead, taking a look at this, even if it's just to skim the executive summary and have a better idea of what we're talking about, because we need to understand our students, right? And this is obviously Canadian data. We also need to think about, okay, what about our Western students? Are they maybe different from some other students? And maybe even the students in your program also have different needs as well than some on your campus. Okay, so very quickly, aside from different literature that's out there, you can find lots of articles on mental health and education, higher education specifically. And so right away, if I go on, some of the top hits are going to be this, right? Importance of student mental health, supporting mental health and well-being, 7 things you should know about mental health and higher education. The one article, though, a couple years ago that always stuck with me was this one. Growing mental health needs of students require creative solutions. And so in this article, the author talks about how that same problem I told you about, how the numbers are on the rise, the demand continues to rise as well. And so what are we going to do about it, right? We can't just keep doing what we're doing. We have to get creative in order to really be able to make some progress in this area. So this is where some of the work that I've been doing comes in. I saw, needing for creative solutions. I wanted to bring in a proactive approach to what I was doing. And so proactively supporting students is kind of the direction that I went with this. And I do, kind of caution in terms of the word support, because sometimes when people hear that, they initially, kind of think, well, what is she doing, right? What is she talking about with students? What's she doing in the classroom? And so before I go any further, I do want to, just acknowledge that we need to recognize our role. So whether our role is as an educator, a staff member, whatever it is, we have to know what we can and cannot do, what we should and what we should not do. So the reality is our campus has tons of professionals, right, who are there to support our students. I am not suggesting that we come in and we take over any of those responsibilities. We can direct students to those individuals, and I'm very clear with my students about that as well, in terms of where I can help and where I can't help. And the other piece of this is you have to set boundaries, because anytime you start doing this kind of work is kind of called, referred to as pedagogy of care. When you start doing this in your classroom, you will find that the floodgates open. Students want more of it, right? And so when I first started this work, I wasn't prepared for that. So now when I speak to people about it, I kind of, warn them or caution them that that might happen as well. And that's not a bad thing, but you need to be prepared for it, especially with your boundaries, right? So aside from knowing our role, you also need to figure out where's the line in the sand for you, right? And one person said to me at one time, she said, Nicole, the line, sometimes you don't know where the line is till you get really close, right? And so that's another thing. My line might be different than your line. And so, we have to recognize those two pieces. Okay, so I would love to hear from people again, because like I said, I know there's so many people on this campus doing amazing things to support students, especially in their courses. So we're going to talk about that in a second. But can I first hear from people, why do you think it's such a desirable model, or at least in my opinion, to embed these things right into the curriculum, right? And I'm not saying there's not, we obviously have services on our campus and those are needed, right? But I'm just proposing an additional model where we bring some of this into the classroom. What do you think? Why do you think that's so valuable? And maybe some of you have done this, Dr. Bell.
I think you touched on it very nicely in terms of the accessibility piece, and in terms of also just the communication piece for a lot of students, especially since they've been away from campus for 2 years now. There's so many supports that are available, but they have been overwhelmed with information about support, and sometimes even just getting that information to them is so complex. So if they can come to their classroom and it's right there, they don't need to do more. There's been so much downloaded on them already in terms of navigating campus and navigating these supports, that if we can sort of take down that barrier, then that really helps.
That's an amazing reflection. And it's so true, right? When I look at like what high school and university students do now, I feel like such a slacker from when I was in school, because they just do everything, right? And I think that's such a good point, is that, instead of adding one more thing, right? Why not, when we know, or at least for a while there, we knew they were, especially coming to class and engaging with us in whatever environment it was, why not give that information there? Amazing. Thank you. I saw another hand.
Thank you. So I think one thing is we are separating mental health from education, from classroom, from the curriculum and syllabus. So if you have the support in classroom, students can see that like mental health is not something separate. It's part of what they should be doing. It's part of the classroom, and so I think this merging the two things helps the students understand that that's not a separate thing. They don't have to spend spend time on that separately from classroom. So that helps bring the two things together so that the students can see that as well.
Wonderful. Awesome. Maybe one more reflection, and then I'll summarize.
One of the reasons I like to do it is because, as you already touched on, the students that need it or don't know that they need it yet are often the ones who benefit the most. The ones who already have supports or already have the skills are appreciative of hearing it again, but the ones who haven't had access to that, it changes their lives sometimes.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. And thank you, you know, all three for those, you know, very different yet related reflections. That's exactly what this is all about, right? I think we have an opportunity, right? And, you know, I don't love the word power, but there is this power of being the person who they look up into in the room. And if you all of a sudden now say something, they might actually think, oh, that's important, right? It normalizes that conversation. It does a lot of things. And as Lauren said, it can change some of their lives. And that's the power of this type of work. So I know that many of you are doing this in your, you know, courses already, right? You are supporting students. So does anyone want to share a couple quick little, what are ways that you're supporting students? And I know some of you in office hours, you have conversations with them, you check in with students. What else are we doing? Feel free to shout out and I'll kind of summarize to the mic. Yes. Wonderful. Thank you. I'll just kind of recap as well in case those on Zoom couldn't hear. Basically, you know, the policies we choose, right? The way we go about our delivery or our instruction, those are all ways that you are supporting students, right? So I think there's very kind of explicit ways to support them where you might have a conversation about mental health, or there's those other ways that are maybe a little bit more implicit, but they really matter a lot in terms of what we're trying to do. So I'll just quickly give you kind of like, how did I get to where I was with this project, the hidden curriculum? So for me, my journey started 2017, the Department of Physiology and Pharmacology, the teaching intensive faculty, we did mental health first aid course. It was informative. There was lots of great information, but it left me feeling like I wanted to do more for everyone, right? It was very, you know, if this happens, you do this. If you're faced with this, you do this, right? And so for me, I started by just having conversations about mental health. And a lot of that was normalizing it for students, as was mentioned earlier about how powerful this can be. In 2018, I was the recipient of the teaching fellowship. And so my project very broadly was titled Making the Implicit Explicit. It started by focusing on learning outcomes and the fact that we spend time as faculty writing these, yet we don't often communicate to students when they're achieving them, how they're achieving them. And then that kind of evolved a little bit into some skill work where I had fun with a project where my team created education escape boxes to teach teamwork. And that, again, was another pivotal moment for me, just to see how powerful taking time to cover a skill that I expect in my course, but I don't teach them how to do, you know, what the outcome of that was. From there, I just kept going with this making the implicit explicit, and I started bringing lessons into the curriculum, right? Now, obviously you have to cut content, right? I'm just gonna say it, there's no way around it. We cannot just add more, we have to make decisions, we have to cut. My class was on Thursdays, so it was called Thrive Together Thursdays. And of a 2-hour class, the first 20 minutes was dedicated to skills lessons. I sat there and said, what do I wish someone taught me as an undergrad and a grad student? And then I also sat there and thought about, okay, they just got an assignment back. Maybe we need to have a conversation about overcoming failure, right? So strategically placed all of those. And at the same time, some other things I was doing was offering more flexibility to students, all right? This was a little bit prior to when SRAs came into play. They're now going away. Some people are going, yay, but if you don't have a backup plan in place, it's just going to cause a lot more trouble for you. So if you want some tips about, you know, how some of our team handles that, we do kind of this grace days. So everything's due Friday with 2 grace days, no questions asked. I'm not going to mark it over the weekend, right? And so I just changed from Sunday deadlines to Friday deadlines. The students think I'm amazing and we all win, right? So, you know, little things like that, you don't have to, you know, make your life more challenging. In 2021, we launched a new grad program and I was leading this program and I was so excited because this was an opportunity for me to take what I was sprinkling into a course and now put it into a whole program. So I love this program. I love everything about it. And it's got skills embedded and professional development right into the curriculum. Again, if anyone wants to hear more about that, I'm happy to have that conversation. And then ultimately that brought me to pitching a project with eCampus, which I'll talk about in a second, on uncovering the hidden curriculum. Now, honestly, when I look back at all these pieces, what they all had in common, because it's not like I sat there and planned this out, right? It just happened. But the reason I think it kind of made sense in the end was because my focus was always on just humanizing learning. I saw pretty quickly that when you start humanizing learning, it just changes everything and it makes my job easier, more enjoyable. And so I can't go back after doing that. Okay, so for me, humanizing learning, this is kind of a model that I've been using, one that I kind of brought pieces together to focus on. So when we think about learning and development, right, we often think about the academic part, right? Content, knowledge, it's all there, right? But there's these other layers that are involved. A personal and a professional domain is how I contextualize it. You can see here, though, that purple bubble, it's big, it's bold, right? That's on purpose. That's because we tend to focus here. Now, there's different types of curriculum. Many of you have probably heard curriculum, grouped into various ways. I'm just going to keep it simple today. So when we think about the formal or explicit curriculum, right, the content and experiences within a course or program, expectations are explicit, the curriculum's usually structured, right? That's our academic domain, right? And so that's where we've mainly focused our efforts. But the reality is there is this other implicit hidden curriculum. And there's different definitions out there. And to be honest, the definition has evolved over the years. So it might mean something different in your discipline. But broadly speaking, it's the unwritten, unofficial, academic, and social lessons that learners acquire implicitly. So these are things we often don't teach, but yet we expect that students know them, or we at least know it's going to play a role in terms of their academic performance. So as I'm talking about this, hopefully, some hazards are going off in your head about how problematic this can be, right? So when we think about the hidden curriculum, the reality is some students come to Western or come to our programs with more of a knowledge or an awareness of it than others. And this is usually framed based on who someone is and where they come from, if I'm putting it very simply. So this could be, someone's, their cultural background, their sex, their gender, their socioeconomic status. All of these things are going to play a role in terms of the hidden curriculum. And you can see from my lines here connecting these things, they all are intertwined with one another. They are not separate entities. And so this becomes a really big problem when we start trying to think about equitable education. So I know there's a lot of problems with this cartoon. We could discuss that for a long time, but I'm going to use it just as a talking point here, because before I share some of the work, and I'm not going to spend too much time on that because it's more of a thing you can do on your own a little bit as you need it. But I really want to talk about inequities in education. So for those of you who haven't seen this cartoon, and there's so many variations of it, you've got reality. So you can see here some people being more advantaged than others, some people being disadvantaged. Equality, we give everyone the same support, but you can see here, we still, not everyone has what they need to be successful. Equity now is representing, we give people what they need to be successful. In this case, it's watching this sports game. And then on the far right, we've got social justice, where we say, okay, let's just remove the fence. Let's remove the barriers, and let's then make sure that everybody has what they need when they need it. So I'm curious to know, in your experience, what does this look like in post-secondary environments? And I've got some examples I can share for sure. So I can share first, or you can share first, whatever you want. Maybe I'll share first, and that'll spark some things. So when I see this, I think of office hours, okay? So I set my office hours. They're usually outside of class because they're office hours, right? And so the reality is there's some students who will always come to those, right? And they are confident and they have no problem coming and wanting more information from me on their assignment. And there's other people who will never step foot in the office hours, right? And there's different reasons for that, right? So timetabling could be an issue. Maybe the student has a part-time job because they need to contribute to their education financially. Maybe they have caregiving responsibilities where they just can't make time for those office hours, right? So if we start thinking about our realities and working towards social justice, one way we can do this, and this is where I think the pandemic gave us some good ideas, we can move our office hours online, right? We can record them. We can make them group office hours so that more students can come. And even if people are afraid to ask, they can listen. They can be a fly on the wall and get that same information. For me, the way we can do this even better is trying to identify how can I bring some of those conversations into the classroom, right? How can I have a forum where I encourage everyone to be comfortable posting so that everyone can see the information? So office hours for me, one example of this. Requiring student participation in your courses, another great example. Not everyone has the confidence to be able to do that, right? Some people raise their hand nonstop and that's fine with them. Other people, they might raise their hand once in your class and that is a significant accomplishment based on, their comfort level. Anyone else have some things that come to mind when we think about inequities in education? Yes. Assessments, yep.
Where you get one exam and people just have to do the multiple choice, the short answer, they're done with it. And that's the reality. And some people thrive with that kind of testing environment. And then you have cases where professors try to change this exam a little bit, right? Offer equal parts of different kinds of question styles so that students who have different strengths for the different questions, some people are better writers, some people are better at memorizing material, they can do well. And that's kind of this kind of equality situation. And then in equity and social justice systems, you see professors occasionally, very rarely, offering almost like build your own exam style assessments where students who prefer written answers can do more written answers with more higher weights in order to focus on the areas that they actually can interact with the content and show that they know the content of the exam rather than just trying to force themselves to answer every single question. And so you kind of see this change where as students have more freedom to choose what kind of assessment style works best for them, or professors who say, hey, if you don't do well on the multiple choice section, the weight can be transferred to a short answer section should that mark be better. And I've had professors that say, whatever your highest mark is, as long as it's a certain percentage above the rest, we'll transfer that weight over. And I find that that has a lot more success in the classroom, especially for students that struggle with multiple choice, because I'm bad at multiple choice. And so I'm really happy whenever I get a chance that says, hey, you can do a short answer question instead.
Yeah, thank you so much for that really in-depth answer. And yeah, assessment is a huge piece and it's a complicated one, right? Because some students actually struggle with flexibility, right? So there's a balance with that too. So, there's so many different, pieces. I'm just checking in the chat right now here as well. And so someone's also suggesting about if you do have your office hours or you're making appointments, maybe vary some of the times that you can do that as well. So, I think, it's pretty rare that we're going to get to a perfect scenario or a perfect situation, but we can make efforts. We can definitely do better, right? My whole kind of, model these days is if we know better, we do better. And so hopefully we're planting some seeds today about ways that you can just slowly start to rethink some of these things. All right, so coming back to that model that I talked about for learning and development, right? Really what I have in mind when I'm going into my classes now is, the academic is no longer the big bubble and the other two are faded in the background. These are working together. And so for me, skills, I kind of, for whatever reason, saw targeting skills as a way to move forward with this type of work. There's different frameworks that are out there that support similar holistic models, right? Educating the whole student. And so you can, if you're interested, go on and, check out some of those. But ultimately, what all of these models say is that in addition to the foundational academic information that we provide students, there are these other pieces, right, that we need to also incorporate. Okay, so hidden curriculum, uncovering the hidden curriculum specifically is the name of the project. So in 2021, there was a call from the eCampus Ontario group, the virtual learning strategies. I actually ended up specifically submitting to the wraparound supports, and I got to give all credit to Dr. Beth Hundy for that one because, I was on a call with the CTL and she said, I think your work fits here. And sure enough, it did. So, I do want to say this was a very large project on a very short timeline, because I think that's important to say. It's also, our team is so proud of what we were able to do. So this was almost funded at $500,000, and it was 10 months to do it. So, this was a labor of love. Some of my collaborators are in the room and they know, how stressful this was. But anyways, we got through it, and we're really proud of what we produced. It's not, we still have places to go with it, but it's a starting point. So cross-institution, cross-sector, college and universities, and then across disciplines. Skills don't need to necessarily be tied to disciplines. And that's one of the really amazing things, because we can create things, we can share them, and they're not necessarily linked to disciplines. We brought together experts who are experts in mental health, learning skills, EDID, and so on. We involved students, we had consultations throughout the process. And ultimately, what we ended up with was this comprehensive suite of accessible and inclusive educational content, which I'm going to chat about in a second. So just a quick kind of nod to, where everyone was located and how, it really did take a village. You can see here is the map of Ontario, just showing where our members were distributed. And again, this included faculty, staff, students, designers, translation services, so many different people. And, I learned so much from all of these different people. Okay, so before you go and create things, you got to see what else is out there, right? So my team, and again, some of them here today, they were involved with leading a very large environmental scan. And then also we did a research study to gather the information we needed to make sure we could create things that people would want to view. So the team of students, they scanned over 1,000 online resources from every college and university in Ontario. We are still putting that data together. There is a publication coming out from this about what we found, but also the process of involving students. And, for the most part, things were AODA compliant, but the main takeaway was things were hard to find and they were rarely accessed. So that's a problem, right? If it exists, but no one's going to it, then, kind of what use is it? And then, obviously our friends, especially over in Ottawa, one of my collaborators, they're not too happy that some of these things also aren't available in French. So that was some of the pieces we found there. With the online survey, students, faculty, again, the data was so great here that I didn't even know what to share today. So I just chose to keep it simple. But we know that students value skill development. And we also know that students are saying, and they're linking it to mental health. So they are also making, that link there. And the other finding from educators is that they're struggling to know, well, how can I do this in my classroom? So those were some of the main pieces. So here's a nice little visual just to show you, when I say comprehensive, there were 54 skills and topics in total that were created. They're organized into 5 different domains. These domains were largely based on those 21st century learning frameworks that I mentioned before. There's over 350 resources in total, because each one of these has multiple. I'm going to show you what it looks like in a second. And we did the impossible thing where we had it all translated to French. So again, comprehensive project, a lot going on here. Okay, so my team had, and you know what? I don't think I clicked share audio. So let's just double check so that we're not. So I want to share very quickly. It's a 1-minute video that the marketing group created, because I think it summarizes nicely what this project is all about.
What if we thought about post-secondary education a little bit differently? What if students and educators alike had the opportunity to connect meaningfully with each other and develop skills that translate across all disciplines? Aside from traditional course material, post-secondary students and educators both learn unspoken lessons, norms, values, and perspectives that carry them through life and impact their mental health. This hidden curriculum encompasses a variety of skills that are important to success, though not explicitly taught. That's where we come in. We humanize learning by helping students and lifelong learners build their confidence, elevating education within and beyond the classroom. Because semesters draw to a close and courses eventually end, but we never graduate from life.
All right, so that gives you kind of a quick little, big picture overview of the project. And here's the URL for those who maybe want to check it out later. So hiddencurriculum.ca. When you go on here, there's so much more info than I can even go through today. There's a section about us and all the people who were part of this. There's some information about the links with mental health, a lot of what I shared with you today. And then also just, why is this work important and what is the link with inclusion? And the other thing we did is we built in a self-assessment, because with 54 skills and topics, it can feel overwhelming. Where do I start? What do I need? And so students and educators can take that self-assessment to determine what domain might be the best for them to target. And then from there, within the domains, they can also go ahead and figure out of those skills, maybe a top 3 that you could start in terms of your efforts. So there's some different questions there that you have to answer in order to get that information back. All right, so I like to just do a quick walkthrough of what it looks like, because I can't do it justice without showing it to you. And so for whatever reason, when I share this work, everyone in the room is always excited about executive function, probably because when we think about, or at least when I think about the area I need a lot of help with, it's this, right? And so executive function, and then people are interested for whatever reason with, perfection paralysis. So that is what I am going to show you now. So let me just do a quick little change in my screen. Hiding all the things. Okay, so when you get to the website and you pick any one of these topics or modules is what we're calling them, this is what you'll see. You'll see a very, brief definition. It'll elaborate a little bit more below. And then the first half is all the content, right? It contextualizes this information, but we were very strategic about it. So we templated it somewhat so that if a learner were to go on the site and they were to visit multiple skills, they would get a familiarity from it all. So the first prompt is talking about why this topic or skill is important for students to develop. And so there's information about that. From there, we've got what is the link between the topic and mental health. And we try to cover both positive and the negative components as well. And the other thing is sometimes the link is not obvious or direct, and we say that, right? We're not trying to pretend that all of these things are directly related to a student's mental health, but a lot of them are closely linked. Then we have what does it look like in practice at post-secondary levels? And so again, there's just some different examples here. And then if you overcome your perfection paralysis, how can that help students? The content section ends by just a reminder of why we should embed this directly into the curriculum for students. And then we shift over to the resource section. So this is where I was saying that we've got all that information that you can, apply to what you're doing. There's 3 things. There's strategies to share with students. There's tips for course design and delivery, and there's activities. So if I were to click on the strategies, I can either look at the web version, or I can go ahead and I can grab these PDFs, which my team spent so much time making, so visually appealing and accessible as well. And so you can just grab this PDF and you can share this directly with students. So we really wanted people to be able to use these things easily. Same thing for the tips for course design and delivery. And then for activities, there are 3 activities for every single skill. Now, some of them you probably will find more useful than others, but either way, if you go on and you click on, for example, the growth scenarios, you'll again see an overview of how much time does this take, what format, what resources do I need to put this in the classroom, and then the instructions. And again, this is all Creative Commons open access, right? So you can, adapt it and adopt as you need to. So other than that, there's also just, the little summary at the bottom. And then we tried to add some additional readings. We especially wanted to make sure that our team was going to literature to bring in different voices, to honor different voices. And so that's another piece that we did, especially towards the end when we were doing our EDI consultations. Okay, let me go back to this quickly, and I'm almost done, I promised. So, in terms of how you can use this, right? Because there's a lot here, and if I'm being honest, this is something we're still working with the marketing team on, is how can we let people know how they can use it? Because that's something we need to work on. So the site was developed for educators, but we know students might go there, right? The other thing we know is that an educator might be a learner first, right? So you need to maybe, want to learn more about this before you're going to feel any sort of confidence to stand in front of a classroom and start talking about it or bringing it in, right? So that's number 1. Number 2, very lengthy, I know, but then you can support learners, and there's different ways you can do this. And, you know, one of the things we wanted to really mention is there can be different effort that is involved with each of these. So starting at the top with low effort, you could just say, hey, students, here's a website you might find helpful, right? And now all of a sudden, you know, you're at least acknowledging and showing some support there. You could go through and say, these are the skills I think are really going to help you with my course. You could grab some of the PDFs and share those, put them on your LMS. You could look at the course design tips and embed them. I mean, probably not right now for the fall semester, but maybe in the future. You could embed activities for students to do. This doesn't have to be in class time. This could be asynchronous as well. And then for me, this is kind of the ultimate, right? Working with our educational units to incorporate resources across programs and courses. And so Medical Sciences 1000Y is a new course that first year students are going to be taking, and it's all about exploring the medical sciences, but there's this layer also about skills. And so I'm really excited because I'm going to be pulling some of the things from this site for people to be able to put in there. And so I think students are going to be really excited about this course. So like I said, I just skimmed the surface in terms of sharing, you know, what I was able to go through with you today. But the good news is that we're going to be continuing this conversation throughout the year, because I think we need time and, you know, we need to bring people together who are maybe interested in some of these things. And so I am so grateful for the CTL who approached me and said, what do you think about doing some workshops? And so we're going to be planning those throughout the fall, the winter, and then in the spring. And my goal with those is we're going to target a different domain at every workshop. And that way, people who are like, yes, I want to focus on this for my students, you can come and talk about that. We will also carve out time to plan and brainstorm and chat. And then after we've tried some things out, hopefully we can come back and share and reflect on that process as well. So a quick little summary, right? So we know there's this link between mental health and academic performance. And so for me, what's on my mind going forward is finding creative and sustainable is really important, ways to proactively support all students in our courses so that we can have greater impact. That's what my goal is. And for me, I think targeting the hidden curriculum and focusing on the overlap between those two things is the next step for me. Your next step might be a little bit different, and that's great too. But if you do want to come on this journey with us, by all means, please do. And, you know, I think it's important that we acknowledge the impact that this kind of work can have, because it's obviously, you know, you have to invest energy, but you're going to get energy back out of it too, which is awesome. So for students over the years, because I've been dabbling in this for a few years, what I've noticed from them is they have increased confidence and competence. Their stress is reduced, which then means that they improve their academic performance, right? For educators, and I'm speaking from my point of view specifically, it has brought so much more meaning and purpose to my role, especially over the past 2 years during a time that felt, you know, mentally and physically exhausting. And so without having this, I don't know what kind of headspace I would have been in. And another really important point is when you start thinking about equitable education, you actually reduce the administrative load and emotional labor, right? And that comment was brought up at the back as well earlier, because now all of a sudden you're not having to deal with one-off scenarios. You're not worrying about, am I being fair? Because upfront, you are letting people know, you know, how you can accommodate everybody should they need it. And then, you know, collectively, you foster meaningful relationships, right? I have had the opportunity of just getting to know so many students. You know, they come back, they want to talk with the next cohort, or they keep in touch. And so we're building those meaningful relationships. And ultimately, we're building a community of care, right? And so when we build that community, you know, I'm going to support them, but they're also going to support me. And that's been something that I can't even, you know, tell you how incredible that has been for me over the years. So my first slide, right, with the road, where do we go from here? And, you know, I promised to talk a little bit about this uncovering the hidden curriculum, but I want to be very, you know, clear that, you know, this was my journey. This was my path. Maybe there's some pieces that you can apply to your own practice, but you really have to ask yourself where you want to go. And you have to make sure you're ready to go there too. And insert whatever you want, right? You know, equitable education, inclusive practices, it is a very large umbrella, and anything you do to work towards that goal is going to be better than nothing at all. So before I end, I wanted to make sure this was kind of one of the last things I said, because a lot of us, most of us, we're running on empty, right? And so again, you know, people are experiencing burnout and they're experiencing compassion fatigue as well. And that might not be a good combination if you're trying to now change things up and do more, right? So be aware of that. Make sure you're ready to engage in this type of work. And honestly, this is a collective effort, right? I told you about how I feel this pressure, you know, to be a certain way or to provide a certain experience for my students, but it's not just on me, right? When students come to this university, there's a community, there needs to be a collective effort. And so we need to talk with each other. We need to think combined, how can we do this work together, right? And so that was also one of my goals with the Uncovering the Hidden Curriculum, is just being able to share and say, you know, some experts across Ontario went and, you know, did this work, so you don't have to. Now all you have to do is think about how you could bring it into your courses. And the other thing, you got to partner with our services on campus. We have the most amazing services, right? With the library services, student affairs, career education. And I have had nothing but amazing experiences. I know some of them are here today as well. And, you know, anytime I talk with them and I'm like, would you mind coming to my class to talk about this? I don't even, you know, tell them what day it is, what time it is. And they already say yes, right? So they're so excited to have the opportunity to come into the classroom and talk about what they know, right? So I think that's part of this too, is, you know, we can't take it all on. We can have the desire, the motivation to start the work, but that doesn't mean we have to do all of the work, right? And I'm very much this believer of, you know, stronger together. Like I said, everything in my journey at Western has all been about community. Okay, so some kind of top tips, right, for promoting inclusive education practices. So number 5 for me is start small and be authentic. Okay, don't try. So you hear that someone else is doing something. Don't try to do that if it doesn't feel comfortable, right? It's not going to go well. So you have to find your comfort zone. You have to be authentic. Otherwise, the students will sniff you out. They'll just know that it's not genuine. The next one is don't be afraid to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. And I think that's where a lot of people get nervous. You know, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I do the wrong thing? But if you have an open dialogue and you're willing to learn and take feedback, then I promise you it's not so scary. You have to accept that this is a journey, and that's something that I've just acknowledged recently. So what I mean by that is I thought, oh, by this point, if I do all those things, I will have an inclusive education practice. That's not true. It's a journey. There's no destination. You just have to keep committed to it. You need to keep learning and unlearning, and you just have to be willing to have those conversations with people who do know these things very, very well. Lean on your community, right? There are excellent people at this institution. I hope you have an excellent peer group like I do over in physiology and pharmacology and anatomy and cell biology. And number 1, no matter what you do, just be human first. You cannot go wrong with being a human first. And that's really what will, you know, signal to students, you know, again, about this humanizing and this pedagogy of care. Oh, look at that. I wanted to be 10:15. I got my goal there. So quick, well, not so quick. I want to take some time, acknowledgements, right? This is a really important slide for me. First and foremost, the Center for Teaching and Learning, right? Not just for having me here today and allowing me to speak about this, but from day one, I have had so many interactions with the Center for Teaching and Learning. I basically think I'm cross-appointed there. I think that I've accepted that and they've accepted it. And, you know, the programming and the people and everything that this center represents is incredible to me. And so much of what I've done is thanks to these people. So sorry. Western and Schulich as a whole, right? We have, you know, really great leadership. You know, especially I'm thinking about my leadership at Schulich right now. I've got my interdisciplinary medical sciences colleagues who are all in the room today. And, you know, I lean on them for everything. You know, we do this work together, and I'm so grateful to all of them, as well as all the teaching intensive faculty, especially. We just have, you know, a different bond, and we lean on each other and we help each other. And you know, I know from talking to colleagues, even at some other schools, not everyone has that. And the staff, we have just amazing staff at Western that offer different services. The Uncovering the Hidden Curriculum on the website, there is a much more detailed list of everyone who was involved. And, you know, I encourage you to go and check it out because, again, you might recognize some of the names from Western. We had a project team, we had our content creators, we had our consultants, our summer student research team, the website and the graphic designers, and then the translation services. I learned so much from this project. I learned about finances, things I didn't want to learn. I learned about, just how to work with different people. How do you make a video where you can capture, attention in 1 minute? I learned so many things. And then obviously this work wouldn't have been possible without all the funding I've had over the years. And you'll see that the majority of this is internal funding. So I am so grateful that Western offers these opportunities, and I'm excited to, keep sharing some of this work. One of the recent grants we got was a knowledge mobilization, and that's where I want to, disseminate this work further. And then the students and trainees, right? I mean, I got involved with this work because of my undergraduate students, now also because of the graduate students, but I've also had the privilege of getting to supervise grad students, master's students, soon to be PhD students. She's sitting in the back there. Postdoctoral scholars last year. This big grant allowed me to have 2 postdoctoral scholars, and I'm just so proud of everything they're doing and where they are today. And then so many research assistants, right? And so collectively, this group and many, many more, I have to thank for everything. And, for being here today and contributing. It really was so wonderful. And I hope I can answer any questions if they're on your mind. So thank you.
Great talk, Nicole. I've got a question, and this may be the group of students that I work with. I work with medical students specifically, but we all know that assessment drives learning. Yep. But it's difficult and challenging to assess these soft skills. I don't like calling them that, but that's seems to be understood. So how do you deal with that? How do you how do you encourage the students to be invested in spending time working on these skills when assessment around these skills is so challenging?
No, such a good question. Thank you so much, Dr. Martin, for that. So basically, at my core, I believe that I don't link these to grades. I just, if I have to do that, I've missed, my whole goal here. But I think there has to be a way to get them intrinsically motivated to do these things, right? So part of it can be, again, if you have an assignment coming up and linking, we need to talk about this skill because it's going to help you here, right? The other thing, though, that for me has been so powerful is encouraging students to engage in reflective practice. And so in my course where I cover these skills, I have them open up a little reflection journal. So we actually just use the student pages on OWL. It's their own private page. And so I'll cover the skill and then I will pause at the front of the room for 3 to 5 minutes and they'll jot down their thoughts about how that made them feel, what's on their mind, and they can go back up and polish it later. And some students still at that point are like, I'm just doing this because she told me to, but a lot of students really do, buy into it. And actually a lot of students from medicine come back and tell me how important that reflective practice was, right? So we know that there's value and we know that it's needed, but it's really difficult. I think you can't force someone to be ready for it. And so what my approach is I'm going to offer this. Some of you want nothing to do with it, and that's okay. Some of you want to engage, and some of you don't know yet, but you do want to engage. And so that's been my strategy with it. And then with the reflection journal, I bring that into participation. I broadened my definition of participation in my grades. So it's no longer, who's the loudest and speaks the more often. We talk a lot about the invisible participation that happens as well. And so then taking on a model from Dr. Beth Hundy's self-assessment of participation at the end of the year, and I know Dr. McLean uses it too, that's what we do. And so again, I think we just have to encourage, these habits, these practices, but at the end of the day, some people aren't ready for it and may never be ready for it. And thank you, Joe, for keeping an eye on the chat and helping to answer some of that.
So nice to hear you, Nicole. I listen to a lot of podcasts when I go out walking. And the one I heard the other day was on the rise of mental health issues in younger and younger people. But the positive message that came out of it was, if we can help these younger people, your students, at an earlier age and help them develop the skills that you're talking about, then they will develop into healthy, mentally healthy, stronger adults who don't need to go through a midlife crisis. So I think what you're doing is so needed and really will address this far beyond just their academic learning and what's happening in the classroom. So I really applaud you for that.
Thank you. That means so much coming from you. And, you know, just to kind of pick up on a few things there, it's funny because this was targeted for higher education, college and university students, but I've had so many high school teachers who have grabbed the link and they're like, I'm going to share this with my students, right? And so I think that's kind of our next challenge is, you know, we got to break down those barriers between K to 12 and then, you know, higher education, because there's a disconnect there. And yeah, there's so much more that we can do with this for sure. Saw another hand over there. Sorry, Ken, we're making you getting your steps in.
Need my exercise. It seems like a lot of the questions and the discussion has been really student focused and student centric, right? How do we get students to want to learn these soft skills? But the question I have is, how do we convince educators to actually incorporate this into their lessons? And I know we had a couple things about, you know, assessments versus learning, and like I'm looking around the room and I don't really recognize very many people from my faculty. And like I've come from like the University of Waterloo, where it's really hard cut, dry. You don't talk about feelings. You just go in and you start working, right?
Yeah, we love our feelings here, especially over in Fizz Farm.
Right. And so I wonder, like I'm working with some professors that don't convince this, right? I've had meetings with professors and I say, oh, what about this? And they say, well, they just got to do it. And how do we convince, how do we make, well, I don't want to say make, but how do we bring
Strongly
this
suggest,
conversation
yeah.
up so that people actually want to do this?
No, and this is such a good point. And, you know, this is the biggest struggle, right? I think we can more easily convince students, right? Because we can show them why it's valuable. But when it comes to educators, yeah, at the end of the day, there will be some people who are not interested. And again, coming back to that same conversation that we just had with Karis about maybe we can slowly encourage some educators as well to get involved. So for me, I try to take the, you know, when I talked about, you know, reducing, you know, administrative load, like I try to take that very logistical strategic point when I talk to people, because for some people, they're like, I don't want meaning in my work, or I don't, you know, like, and that's fine. That's what you're all about. But for the second part of that, I think that's how we can get people involved in this, right? It really is an opportunity to, I think, you know, just again, make those conversations easier with students. But the other piece to this is, you know, and that's where I'm hoping with this knowledge mobilization is I really want to get some scholarship going with this. And that's the lens that is on our minds. One of my colleagues who was on this grant, I have to share this story because it's amazing. So he's from Nipissing. And he has his master's in science, but after being part of this project, he's now enrolled to do his PhD, and he's actually focusing specifically on that. And so I don't have answers right now. And I think that, you know, we're going to have to, you know, start talking to people, doing some different interviews and find out what are the barriers? Why are you not wanting to do this? And for a lot of people, I think they just don't know. And so again, if we can make it as easy as possible for people to do, but ultimately, here's the other piece. If we're all just doing this randomly in our courses, that's not an effective or efficient model, right? We need to come together as programs, and we need to think, how do we support a student from high school to year one? And then what do they need in year 2 and year 3? And then year 4, there's those career skills coming up, right? So we have to think, you know, from a program level. And my dream, my goal is that one day Western thinks as an institution about how could we, again, take away content and get students going through these pieces so that it no longer ends up on the individual, you know, plates of educators. Because I think that'll always be, you know, a bit of a roadblock there. So there was a question in the chat about how do we get faculty to learn the skills themselves. And I think that's such an important piece, Julia, as well, because, and that's why I was saying that you might want to engage as a learner first and lean on your colleagues and go through and look some things up. And, you know, that's where I'm also hoping this, these workshops we can form kind of a community of practice where people who are interested in doing this work can come together. We can support each other. We can talk with one another because, you know, again, you shouldn't do this work alone. And again, it can feel a little bit intimidating to go in a classroom and talk about, for example, you know, procrastination when, you know, if you yourself are, you know, a solid procrastinator. So it feels very wrong, you know, to do that, but that becomes part of the humanizing conversation, saying, this is something I'm working on too, and these are areas I struggle. So again, you know, always coming back to that humanizing the curriculum. Joe's asking about the workshops. So Dr. Ken Meadows and I are on that. We're going to be posting soon. I think we're hoping for 2 in the fall, 2 in the winter, 1 in the spring to cover all 5. We're hoping for Thursdays is what we're thinking, and we're going to pick some dates and get that advertised soon. And, you know, I'm really excited about that. And then my next step after that, I really want to bring people together on the scholarship side. I see an opportunity to study the impact of this for educators and for students. And so again, I can't do that alone. I have learned the value of working with other people. And so that's kind of one of the underlying goals of those workshops in that community as well. Yes, please. I think are we till 10:30?
Yes, actually, I just want to add to the conversation about one participant there about how to encourage educator to incorporate like what you share right now into their classroom. So I just want to add to your to this conversation. I feel like what you share with me today, and I am a learner. I will blow up by what you share. And as an educator, I have questions around it. So for a 3-hour lecture, I have so many technical knowledge to share. How can I include that in my classroom? But at the end of the day, after I finish my lecture, I reflect on what I can help students to grow as a student. And when I reflect on that, and I really want to make an impact and significant for students in my classroom, I will rethink about it. So you are successful at this point. I am convinced to spend at least 10 minutes per lecture to include
Amazing.
it. And this is so impactful and meaningful. And why not?
Yeah.
And when I share about that, like 10 minutes per lecture, like every can help to change the life of teenager in the future to avoid midlife crisis. And I want to do that.
Yes,
For my students.
and you'll find that the next year you'll be like 10 minutes wasn't enough, and you want to, you know, but again, so, and I think it was actually Dr. Lindy Wall who said this to me a couple years ago. She said, you know, with her courses, she sits back and thinks, what do I want them to get out of it, right? What do I want them to remember and walk away with, you know, a day after the exam, a month after the exam, a year after the exam, right? And so I think if you can just have that really difficult, you know, realization with yourself that, you know, there's content everywhere. Students can access that. We don't need to provide, you know, as much as maybe we do. And so sacrificing a little bit of that to then have this other benefit where they then can go and maybe engage in the content better. I mean, it is a change in how you see things. And, you know, I teach at the 4th year level. So I am not in those 1st year foundational courses. So, you know, I understand how important content is and building a strong foundation for students. But I think over the past couple of years, we've also seen that we can deliver content differently. And if we're going to bring students into the classroom, you know, how can we excite them? How can we get them excited and talking? And this might just be a piece, whether it's at the beginning of the class or the end of the class, or maybe you say, go check out that time management module. And then at the end of the class, let's hear what you thought about it, right? And, you know, I think there's so many ways, again, start small, little pieces, but, you know, I promise it's worth it.
Yeah, I want to really, from the heart, thank you, Nicole, for coming and sharing your learning journey with us today and your process, nonlinear process, which I think is such a wonderful thing to acknowledge in all of our journeys in terms of humanizing the curriculum and sharing this wonderful resource for us. It's lovely to hear from all the questions and all the comments, thinking about how we can just take this in our own individual way and make it fit with our own needs and students and where we are in our own learning. So thank you very much, Nicole.
Thank you. Oh, thank you.
So you will be hearing more about the upcoming workshops that the Center for Teaching and Learning will be facilitating with Nicole's wonderful guidance. We are on a break until 11 o'clock. We resume at 11 o'clock. If you're interested in decolonizing the curriculum with the new Indigenous learning bundles, we'll be back in here. If you're looking for the Students as Partners session, you are out the door and around the corner in room 35. And